Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to talk about two very interesting charts of two cult leaders that somehow possess people's minds to commit mass suicide. And the first one we're going to look at is cult leader Jim Jones. And the second one we're going to look at is Marshall Applewhite. And both of them were the leaders of cults that committed mass suicide. So what I think you're going to find very, very interesting is the fact that they were born a few days apart. I'm going to go ahead. Let's put both charts up here of Jim Jones and Marshall Applewhite. And looking at both of their charts, Jim Jones was born May 13th, 1991. While Marshall Applewhite was born May 17th, 1931. So, interestingly enough, their charts are very different, but I think that that's very telling in terms of the relationship of the outer planets, because they will be in the same signs and conjunctions. And one of the telling things of both of their charts is that they both have Jupiter conjunct Pluto, which represents enormous power. It is power magnified when Jupiter comes together with Pluto. And in the sign of Gemini, this deals with the thinking mind and communications. They have control over people. That's pretty telling. But let's focus in for a minute on Jim Jones, because those of you that don't know, the whole drinking the Kool-Aid saying comes from Jim Jones. He somehow brought his whole community down to Guyana. It's called the People's Temple. Brought them down to Guyana, where they were going to have a spiritual community. And they were going to build the whole thing. No air conditioning, no luxuries. And he was in control. And once he was down there, Jim Jones was, let me tell you, was taking massive amounts of drugs at the time, wore these sunglasses on top of it. I mean, how do you believe somebody that's constantly wearing sunglasses? I need to see people's eyes when I speak with them. So looking at his chart, when we think about the mind, we're always going to refer to the moon. The moon is the mind and consciousness. And going to his moon, it is tightly conjunct Rahu, which would make a very obsessive compulsive behavior. And next to Uranus. That makes one unpredictable. So his behavior was extremely unpredictable. And in the fourth house, this represents our sense of security, which there isn't any with this powerful combination. He does have exalted Venus there, which is probably how he was able to mesmerize people in such a way. But really, that power comes from the Pluto and Jupiter in Gemini. And for him, it's in the seventh house, which means he gets other people to do a lot of his work. He has connections and power over people, over others. Now, the other variable that I think is very, very important when you're talking about someone's mind and consciousness, you look to the fifth house. It deals with intelligence and the mind. So going to his fifth house, he has the sun in Aries exalted. Wow, that's a pretty powerful mind. But I think the real telling truth to this is that the ruler of the fifth house, because the fifth house has Aries on it, which is ruled by Mars, the ruler of the fifth house is Mars, and it is debilitated in the eighth house. That speaks volumes for this man's mind and what he was about and how he tried to control people. And the derangement of the mind with this Mars. Now, on top of that, Saturn even opposes Mars in the eighth house. The eighth house can deal with corruption. It can deal with disgrace, humiliation. Of course, it can deal with transformation and change. It's very extreme, and the choice that he made was on the dark side, using his power. So that's just a brief summary of what I could see just glancing over Jim Jones' chart. Now Marshall Applewhite, this is a completely different scenario. He told his followers, this was during the time that Hale-Bopp, the comet, was coming through, and he somehow convinced his followers, now not quite as many, because Jim Jones, about 1,000 people died. But with Applewhite, it was, I think it was like not even 20, but still, there's a big difference between the two, I want to say. They took a poison, in both cases they took a poison to end their life, but he had them convinced that they were going to go to a better life and follow along on the comet Hale-Bopp on the tail. And this was heaven or something. I don't know how people are convinced of these things, but somehow these individuals have the power to convince them. So when we go to Marshall Applewhite's chart, I noticed that his ascendant is in Pisces, and he has Rahu on the ascendant, so he is extraordinarily powerful. But the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in Gemini in his chart is in the 4th house. The 4th house is sometimes referred to as the seat of power. I find that interesting. Jupiter-Pluto are in the house of the seat of power. And referring back to Jim Jones, he has Moon, Rahu, Uranus, Venus in the 4th house, the seat of power. That's pretty interesting that they both have this powerful reference to the 4th house. Now, furthermore, of course, Marshall Applewhite has the Mars debilitated in Cancer as well. And it goes to what? The 5th house. The 5th house is the house that deals with the mind, and Mars is there. Just like Jim Jones had an affiliation with the 5th house in Mars. It ruled the 5th house, but went to the 8th house. And in this case, the 5th house where Mars is located, the moon becomes the dispositing planet of Cancer, which is on the 5th house. And it goes to the 2nd house. Now, the 2nd house deals with our speech, our power to convince people. And with the moon is conjunct both Mercury and Venus. And it's interesting that Venus does rule the 8th house. So this is connecting the 8th house with the 5th house once again. But I find it very, very interesting that Jim Jones' sun is at 29 degrees of Aries. Of course, it's exalted, but 29 degrees of Aries. And Marshall Applewhite's moon is at 29 degrees of Aries. Now, this is a powerful placement. It is in the nakshatra Kritika, which is sharp, cutting, and very protective. It is a powerful nakshatra, Kritika. Kritika is ruled by the sun. So this is important. Actually, in Jim Jones, the sun being in Kritika, in Aries, exalted, is like the sun's also in its own sign because of its nakshatra ruler is the sun. But I think what's very telling about Marshall Applewhite's chart is the fact that his sun is at 2 degrees of Taurus. And that is exactly conjunct the most malefic, violent fixed star of all, Agol. Agol is it deals with death. It deals with treachery, addiction. It deals with decapitation, losing your head, death. And this was a part of what he was a part of in how he convinced people. But the difference between the two, I think a big difference, is Marshall Applewhite believed what he was telling everyone himself, and he took the poison and killed himself as well with his group. He believed it. The difference is Jim Jones tried to escape after everyone was killing themselves, and somebody shot him and killed him. He was not going to take the poison, and he was getting the heck out of there. Big difference. He didn't believe any of the stuff he was saying. He was a murderer, where I think Marshall Applewhite believed, and he felt like he was doing a good thing. So I just wanted to bring to the forefront the interesting charts of how we can see things relative to the mind and the power in the chart and what these horrific and treacherous events were all about. So with that, I'd like to close. I hope you enjoyed this class. If you would like to learn more information about me, if you would like a consultation or sign up for my free newsletter, go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. Or if you would like to learn Vedic astrology, take this to the next level. Join our community. Go to my university website, which is University of Vedic Astrology.com. Thank you.